So today we'll be talking about the
French Revolution.
yeah.
There.
It's alright. So before we get into the actual events of the revolution, I think it's important to understand the origins and study what happened in pre-revolutionary France. So basically, France at this time had the Ancien Regime under King Louis XVI, and throughout the whole history of monarchy in France, they practiced a style of absolutism where the king was like ultimate despot. He had all of the power, he had the paternal control over all of the citizens, and he was like the father, the great figure that everyone was subordinate to. And this system was not working at this point. There was food shortages throughout the countryside and peasants were in revolt. There was rampant poverty and crisis and rioting and just kind of big levels of economic and social inequalities within the cities, especially Paris. And all of this was happening at a time when Enlightenment ideals were starting to spread and people were starting to understand more about different styles of government and philosophy and creating their own ideals. And all of this was important because at the time we saw the real emergence of the public sphere. So at this point, people actually started having public opinion and creating pamphlets and documents and having like meetings and groups where they actually discussed what was going on in public life and they reacted to it and they commented upon it. And because of this, the symbol of the absolute monarch, kind of the sacred godly king, was beginning to get kind of desacralized. And this is what Chatrier wrote about, where he said the image of the desacralized king made it seem like he wasn't this like untouchable person and people could actually like react and change what was going on within their society. And so as all of this was happening, France was going through like a multitude of mishaps with the American Revolution and wasting money and spending too much money, and the monarchy did not understand how the regular people were living. And so at this time, King Louis called for the Estates General to convene, which was made up of the clergy, the nobility, and the rest of the people in the Third Estate. And the Third Estate decided that they wanted to split off and create a national assembly where they would stay and make a constitution and create a new form of government for the people. And so people throughout the cities, they enjoyed this concept, they liked this. And because of this, there was the storming of the Bastille, where when they thought the National Assembly was threatened, they stormed the Bastille and basically tried to keep it intact. So they really wanted this to happen. So this is when the real revolutionary process began, and there was abolition of feudalism. They drafted the Declaration of Rights of Man, and then women responded with the Declaration of Rights of Women. There was the Women's March on Versailles. There's still rampant hunger, rampant poverty, and all of this was happening at the same time that the royals were starting to begin to feel threatened. And so this came at the time where the royal flight happened, and then the constitutional monarchy was created, and that was kind of like, there was a crisis at that point, and then finally they created the First Republic. So with the First Republic, we see the real, the coming about of the revolutionary ideals, liberty, fraternity, and equality. And at this process, again, symbols are very important, where they created new revolutionary symbols and political symbols that would be used to mark the new republic. And these were like the symbol of Marion, which was showing liberty, or the symbol of Hercules to show strength. And all of these were changed and applied, and their perceptions were changed to fit the political climate and to fit the revolutionary path. And so as this was going on, the National Convention then started to become increasingly more radicalized at the point where they executed the king and queen. And so within the National Convention, you had the Jacobins, who were much more radical and much more prone to violence, and then you had the Girondists, who were much more moderate. And the Jacobins started getting much more popular because throughout the cities, there were groups of people called sans-culottes, and these people were the regular working proletariat, and they were sick of the hunger and of the poverty, and they wanted more to be done faster, and so they sided with the Jacobins because of this. So yeah, to get a good sense of how it was during the revolutionary period, it's interesting to study memoirs, which all kind of, the ones that we studied in class, talked about how there was hunger and obviously long lines and a lack of food and all these problems, and there was like a clear failure of the revolutionary ideals within Paris and within France itself. And one of the memoirs by Nicolas Rétif talked about how he saw a sign that said, liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. So basically, this showed the radicalization and increase of violence and how people were seeing violence as the only option to create the society that they wanted. So with this, the Jacobins took control and they created the Committee of Public Safety within the National Convention, and that was headed by Robespierre. And Robespierre obviously kind of touted these violent ideals because he had this utopian vision, and he felt that like violence was the only way, or not violence was the only way, but that he would do whatever it takes to reach his vision. And he started doing that with, redressing the calendar, changing religion, changing all the holidays, changing the scope of everything in society. And he tried as much as he could to create his vision of his ideal society. And while I think this is important to show that how revolutions can regress into this kind of action, and how people feel when they get this kind of power that they can continue to do this kind of violent action because they feel that they have no other choice. So yeah, Robespierre kind of continued his reign of terror, and that went on, and basically it ended up with the saying of how the revolution killed its own children. And so once he basically came out of power and was executed with the Thermidorian reaction, and then the Thermidor set up their own failed government, and that did not work out as well. And this paved the way for Napoleon to sweep in and take control for himself and kind of control the government. And there was a quote in one of our readings that we did that I think shows, and it said how almost always after prolonged civil disturbance, that tyranny becomes established because it offers to all the exhausted and fearful parties the hope of finding shelter in it. And this was said by Madame de Staël, and it makes sense in this situation with how Napoleon was so quickly able to get in power, take control, rise up, and then create his own empire because people were exhausted and fearful of what would happen in the future, and so they regressed. And so while I believe the revolution ended at this point when Napoleon created the empire, some people say that it goes on through the empire and to the next phase, which it could be included in that situation, but I think that was so far removed from the basic revolutionary ideals, and it was so far removed from what they actually wanted to create, that I think it ends with the empire. So yeah, the French Revolution, I think, is very interesting because while it did have all of these ideals, it had liberty, equality, fraternity, it reshaped the government, it changed the basis of politics in Europe and in France, all in the Western kind of society for the rest of the century. It's interesting to call it a revolution because while it did do all these things, it did them mainly for old enough, rich enough white men. And without including women, without including people of color, it's hard to call it a revolution. It's hard to say that these ideals were actually applied because, liberty was not achieved. Women did not have the rights that the men had. Black people did not have the rights that anybody had. They still, even after they abolished slavery, they continued to go into Western Africa. They continued to, create their colonial gains and do all of that. And they didn't have the right to vote either. So liberty was not really achieved. In the same way, equality was obviously not achieved. And fraternity, while it was achieved in the sense that there was the destruction of the paternal system and the introduction of fraternalism within government, there was no fraternity between people and between the citizenry. So in that sense, while the French Revolution was obviously important for having these ideals and creating a society and creating this new kind of situation from the ground up, from the action of the people, it left out so much of the population that it cannot be said to be some kind of successful revolution. So yeah, thank you.